Listen to podcasts of Joe Walsh and Chicago's Morning Answer with Dan Proft and Amy Jacobson on the AM 560 mobile app. Download it today at 560theanswer.com/mobile.
Good morning, Dan and Amy. And Speaker Ryan had a press briefing yesterday in advance of yet another briefing he's supposed to get from the Department of Justice next week as to providing the documents that substantiate the claims DOJ and FBI have made in briefings to Congress. Okay, I hear what you're saying. Now show me the documents that confirm what you're saying is true. That doesn't seem to be unreasonable, but it's been very difficult to get specific performance from DOJ and FBI on this topic.
And so we received an oral briefing 2 weeks ago, but what we're asking for and what we require and we expect is the corroborating documents that back up that oral briefing. And last night, they could have brought it to us today, and they chose to do it next week. That doesn't help. Frankly, the sooner the Department of Justice complies with all of our document requests, which are legitimate document requests, the better this is going to be for everybody. And had they complied with these document requests earlier when we made them, we probably could have spared the country of all this drama.
For more on this, we're pleased to be joined by Ron Hosko, former FBI Assistant Director, now the President for the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for joining us again. Appreciate it.
Good to be with you again.
Is Paul Ryan right to be a bit frustrated with the lack of compliance from Justice / the FBI?
You know, I'm not too sure, because there's also been some reporting that the DOJ and the FBI had compiled these documents and that they were available last week as some of these comments were being launched back and forth and criticisms, but that the actual documents were prepared and were waiting for Congress, and that very few people came to review them. So I'm not sure exactly where the truth lies, but let me tell you what I'm deeply, deeply concerned with. Here is a person who's now been outed as a longtime FBI source, confidential source, kind of quietly laying in the weeds, doing what some sources do. They provide information when it touches the area of interest of the FBI, where the source might have access. And here's a person who has contributed for years, quietly, discreetly, confidentially, and presumably because it looks as though not just the FBI, but that he had been getting paid for different research projects by the Pentagon as well. A source that presumably was both trusted and added value. And not surprisingly, in this effort by Devin Nunes and others, that source has been progressively outed. His identity has been exposed. I'm told he's had reporters rummaging through his trash at his house, stalking him at the end of his driveway, at the end of his street. And so this is the result of the congressional effort. And if Paul Ryan's first assertion and Trey Gowdy's first assertion was right, that the FBI did what we would want them to do in this case, what have they accomplished other than to out a source and to basically put the suggestion in other human sources' minds that we can out you too? This is your potential fate if you get too close.
Okay, I hear what you're saying, but let me provide some gentle pushback to this as well.
Come on.
Had Justice and the FBI been more forthright through this entire investigation to inspire the confidence of members of Congress, who could then inspire the confidence of the American people that there is nothing nefarious afoot here, and there's every reason to give the senior leadership of the FBI and the DOJ and the CIA the benefit of the doubt, then perhaps we wouldn't know who Mr. Halper is. But at every turn over the last year, you've had the FBI at the senior leadership level under Comey and McCabe, not every turn, but many turns, disgrace themselves. It's not me saying it. It's the DOJ Inspector General saying it, and certainly the histrionics of Brennan and Clapper on the airwaves isn't helping either.
Well, I think what we're struggling with is, in some significant measure, a very politicized effort. Look no further than the collaboration between House Intelligence Committee members, where mutual support and agreement. I mean, these guys can barely agree on, is it daytime or nighttime? I don't know that they could agree on that. So you have a report that Nunes and company manufacture, and then you have essentially the opposite coming out from Schiff, all of whom, by the way, in my estimation, because I'm trying to pitch down the middle here, were talking way too much throughout, talking way too much at the beginning, talking way too much at the end. So there was, in my estimation, almost zero integrity to the process, certainly on the House side. I think that the Senate to date has been much better about putting their head down, conducting investigation, looking over the shoulders of government officials and agencies, and keeping their mouth shut, and so that you can perhaps find the conclusions at the end of the investigation, rather than talking your way through it throughout. I think there was zero integrity to that process.
Well, but I'm sorry to interrupt. But how much integrity has Jim Comey shown through this process? How much integrity has even the Mueller the Mueller special counsel team shown with all of the reports of Andrew Weissman and perhaps others leaking information, even though they're not formally talking, they're leaking information to the New York Times and the Amazon Post? I mean, I suppose I would concede your point about the politicization of the process, but that requires an assessment of those that were in charge of these agencies and in senior positions, the Obama administration at the outset of all of this.
Well, look, I don't know that anything has been proven or demonstrated. I think there's a lot of talk about Andrew Weissman. I don't know that a single piece of true fact, something you can put your hands on, has come out suggesting that Weissman has leaked anything. In fact, I think the opposite. I think if Mueller believed that were to be the case, like he suspected Strzok, he'd throw him off the team. I think he has that team sworn to secrecy.
Well, Strzok and Page got outed, though. I mean, that's a little bit different. They became a national embarrassment with the text messages becoming public.
No, well, that's true, but they were tossed off that team months before the reason became clear to us why.
That's true.
Could you weigh?
So I think Mueller has that locked down, and I think the proof of that, or perhaps one possible proof of it, is we're getting details of what ground he has crossed months after the fact. And I think that's largely because of defense attorneys or people on the defense side. I don't think it's because of Mueller, because I think Mueller's much further down the road than we know, and that's because of his silence and his team's silence.
But what about FBI, Comey, McCabe, this IG report that's coming out next week that's suggested is not going to be particularly complimentary of Comey after the report on McCabe, or Loretta Lynch for that matter?
Yeah, I welcome that report, because that perhaps will give us the best assessment of the facts, supported by details, like he did in the McCabe report. McCabe, but I read the report. Perhaps we've talked about it since. I read it line by line, word by word, and unfortunately for Andy McCabe and for the FBI, the IG made a very compelling case that McCabe engineered the passing of information to rebut a certain narrative, or to perhaps create one, that he engineered the passing of that information, and he didn't have the authority to do it, and that he essentially covered up the fact that he had done it and lied about it, and he paid a dear price for it. He was fired within 26 hours of his time to retire from the organization. So that's a piece. I'm looking forward to the rest of the pieces, the actions of Loretta Lynch that brought discredit to her and doubt about whether the DOJ could be a fair arbiter of the Hillary case. Jim Comey, I don't need the report to come to the conclusion that Jim Comey did usurp the role of the federal prosecutors in that case. Did he have reasons? Quite clearly he did. He stated them a number of times. But did he usurp the role of the prosecutors? I think unquestionably he did. Will he be criticized for it? I think unquestionably he will. The press conference was extraordinary, but I think the value here is the IG can put some meat on the bones. He can tell us what is true, and some of what we've been hearing that's made up of whole cloth.
Are you concerned at all with the length of time that it has taken, given that Trump has tweeted he's worried that the document or that the report is being, doctored? Is this a reasonable length of time?
I think it's important for the Inspector General to dig deeply to find as many facts as they can. Look, this is the difficulty of producing reports on important topics, and look at the FBI's work on the Hillary Clinton servers. No doubt, even though they're going to say we weren't moved by the election timetable, certainly they had to have their foot full on the gas and do what they could to try to recreate and reconstruct thousands and thousands of email messages that were deleted or destroyed. Mm-hmm. Broken into pieces, devices destroyed. That it is a laborious effort, and I think this Inspector General, who is apolitical, he is not beholden to the FBI. His predecessor was not beholden to the FBI. We always thought they rather enjoyed bringing criticism, regardless of what we were doing. And so I don't think it's that. I think it's the normal process, and that process involves giving a draft report to DOJ and to the FBI for comment, and gives them the opportunity to read it and say, you got this wrong, and here's why you got it wrong. And the IG could take that, or they can disregard it.
I want to go back to the FBI informant that was outed and just and talk a little bit about that. So there's a lot of questions. Well, if it was just to prevent the Russians from influencing, incurring, embedding themselves to disrupt the election, then why wasn't there a source in the Hillary camp as well? And maybe, and the kind of answer is, well, maybe there was, we don't know. But the response has been, well, because we had credible information that they wanted Trump to win, and so they were going to move into the Trump camp to try and facilitate that, undermine Hillary Clinton, undermine the election, whatever. So that's been the response. Then this week we get Ben Rhodes out there, because he's hawking a book like everybody else, talking about President Obama didn't do more publicly about Russia because he said, the president, well, those people aren't going to listen to me. I'm not a credible messenger on this topic to those people, meaning people who are not dyed-in-the-wool Democrats. I mean, are those credible explanations for why there was so much apparent focus on Trump, to the exclusion of the Hillary Clinton campaign, to the exclusion of making this public, even though at the end of the day, President Obama, Loretta Lynch turned around and say Russia did not impact the election. The election was not compromised. I mean, how do you square all that?
I square it like this. The FBI has guidelines that really determine how they work and with what tools in their toolbox that they can work. And in some cases, you don't even have a case. The FBI does not open cases randomly. The FBI is not going to randomly open a case on the Trump campaign on the supposition that the Russians may try to get cozy with them. They're going to open a case based on what's known as predication. That is, facts and circumstances that suggest a person may be a national security threat. In this case, I think they've made the case that they were looking hard at Carter Page. They had some intelligence coming from a foreign service that Papadopoulos was worthy of examination.
But there's some suggestion the informant was embedded in that campaign and talking to those folks before the Papadopoulos Australian diplomat conversation.
Well, first, the informant was never embedded in the campaign. I think what it was that you're going to take a source who may have access or may be able to create access to a certain person and brush up against that person and, be seen a couple times, start a conversation, maybe invite somebody to a drink or invite somebody to write a paper. And I think that's by and large what this source was doing. His efforts were focused, I think, on the players who were predicated on a counterintelligence investigation, but not directed toward the campaign. My guess is that whatever documents the Congress overseers are going to be exposed to are going to validate that sources are directed to go collect information in narrow ways where they have access, and where the FBI agents have said, hey, we have predication. Go look at this guy, Ron Hosko. See if you can start a conversation. See what he's about. See if you can get close to him and understand who his network is. That's the starting point for these sorts of investigations. It is not a wide range. In fact, the guidelines push the FBI away from the notion of, broadly just, hey, let's go after this campaign because we don't like the person. And let me tell you very quickly, the contrast with the Hillary campaign. We don't know the facts over there.
Right.
We don't know who might on her side might have had those sorts of similar relationships and been predicated by the FBI and had a source go toward that person. And it could be that there was no predication. The FBI has to have some starting point, some initial, kind of credible information to begin. You don't just open a case. FBI agents don't have a dispute with their neighbor and come back to the office and say, I want to open a case on my neighbor, Joe Smith. Right. He looked at me sideways when he was cutting the grass today. You don't get to do that. In fact, because the organization has this power, that power is constrained by this document known as the DIOG.
FBI also needs new rules about dancing in bars with your service weapon. Ron Hosko, we're going to have to leave it there. Former FBI Assistant Director, now the President for the Law Enforcement Legal Defense Fund. Ron, thanks for joining us. Appreciate it.
Always a pleasure.
And you joined us on the Turnkey.Pro answer line.